Hello again to this video clip series, My Journey to God in a Very Secularized World. We were talking these last few video clips on the topic of the history of communion in the hand. And we had begun talking in the last video clip about the situation in Russia under communism that it was explained by Bishop Schneider. In the very beginning of the Christian church, he explains, Bishop Schneider explained, Holy Communion was received in the hand. However, Bishop Schneider explains that as the early church became increasingly aware of the greatness of the moment of Holy Communion, she searched to find a ritual expression that can bear witness in the most perfect manner to her faith, love, and respect. By the 6th century, with greater understanding and adoration of the sacrament, Holy Communion placed directly on the tongue became the norm. Those who continued to distribute communion in the hand were censored. The sect known as Cassiani was condemned in 839 for refusing to receive communion on the tongue. The Synod of Rouen in 878 threatened to suspend sacred ministers if they distributed communion in the hand. Aware of the magnitude of the greatness of the moment of Holy Communion, the Church, in its 2,000-year-old tradition, has tried to find a ritual that could testify as perfectly as possible to her faith, to her love, and to her respect. This occurred when, in the wake of an organic development, at least from the 6th century, the Church began to adopt the mode of distributing Holy Eucharist specie directly on the tongue. There is given testimony to this, the biography of Pope Gregory the Great, and an indication of the same Gregorio related to Pope Agapito in the Dialogues number 3. The early Church Fathers were concerned about safeguarding fragments of the Holy Eucharist. You can find this in the Catechesis Mystagogicae 5:21. This was another reason for the institution of receiving Christ directly on the tongue in both the early Eastern and Western churches. Receiving Holy Communion in the hand posed the very real hazard that tiny particles, including those that were imperceptible to the human eye, could be dropped. St. Jerome expressed his concern about even a tiny fragment of the Holy Eucharist falling to the ground. He wrote, "If anything should fall to the ground, there is danger." According to the Coptic Church, there is no difference between the smaller and larger particles of the Eucharist. Even those smallest ones, which cannot be perceived with the naked eye, they deserve the same veneration and possess the same dignity as the whole bread. Bishop Schneider reminds us that the Holy Eucharist is the gift par excellence that Christ has left for the Church, his bride. Thus, the believer's attitude when receiving this precious gift is one of humility of the centurion, the attitude of one who allows himself to be fed, precisely the attitude of a child. The writings of the early fathers of the Church continue to teach us that the proper outlook while receiving Holy Communion is cum amore timore, joy with love and fear. From the 6th century, prostration and genuflection before receiving the Blessed Sacrament was common in monasteries. By the 10th and 11th century, the practice had spread. John Paul II, in his last encyclical, Ecclesia de Eucharistia, left to the Church an ardent warning that sounds like a true testament. He wrote in that encyclical, he says, "By giving the Eucharist the prominence it deserves, and by being careful not to diminish any of its dimensions or demands, we show that we are truly conscious of the greatness of this gift." And then toward the end of the encyclical, he wrote, "There can be no danger of excess in our care for this mystery. That's number 61. The awareness of the greatness of the Eucharistic mystery shows itself especially in the manner in which the Lord's body is distributed and received. Kneeling is the biblical gesture of adoration. Adoration is the highest form of prayer, and as St. Augustine warned, we would sin were we not to adore the Holy Eucharist. Then Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger confirmed that kneeling is the right, indeed the intrinsically necessary gesture before the sacred body and precious blood of Christ. Those who are unable to kneel must also make an alternative act of reverence. Pope John Paul II exhorted the Church to safeguard and strengthen the sacredness of the Eucharist. He noted that this was important since our secular society seeks to desacralize the sacred. In the conclusion of this short work on the Eucharist, Schneider reflected. He says, God willing, the pastors of the church will be able to renew the house of God, which is the church, placing the Eucharistic Jesus in the center, giving him the first place, making it so that he received gestures of honor and adoration, and also at the moment of Holy Communion. The church must be reformed, starting from the Eucharist. Ecclesia ab Eucharistia, amen des es, which means the church must be reformed by the Eucharist. The sacred host is not something, but someone. Here, he is there, was the way St. John Maria Vianney synthesized the Eucharistic mystery. He is there in the tabernacle. Therefore, we are involved with nothing other than, and no one less greater than, the Lord himself. Dominus est. It is the Lord. You can find that in Snyder's book, Dominus est. It is the Lord. It's been published. And also St. Paul also said in 1 Corinthians 11, he says, eat to condemnation if you do not recognize Jesus in the Eucharist. This is the meaning of what St. Paul tells us. The first job of a priest is to protect the sacraments. If a priest does not help the people to discern the body and blood of Christ, the people come up without the proper preparation. This priest will have to answer to God on Judgment Day. Since his election, which took place, Pope Benedict XVI, since his election took place right after the year of the Eucharist, Pope Benedict has frequently reaffirmed the real presence of our Lord Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. He also retrieved, beginning from the Feast of Corpus Christi in 2008, the use of giving Holy Communion on the tongue to kneeling faithful. Struck by this papal example, numerous priests, often among the younger ones, began to doubt the merits of generalized communion in the hand, considered also by some as one of the greatest damages of the liturgical reform. His book, Dominus Est, of Bishop Schneider, specifically addressed this issue. According to him, we can say, as did Monsignor Malcolm Runjith, Secretary of the Congregation of Divine Worship, years ago, in the preface of his book, that communion in the hand has fostered a loss of faith on the part of the faithful, as well as that of the clerics in the real presence of Christ, and therefore a lack of respect for the Blessed Sacrament. We refer to the displacement of tabernacles in dark corners of the churches, to the faithful who do not genuflect anymore before the Blessed Sacrament, the sacrilegious communions, etc., and so on. Pope John Paul II underlined the necessity of external expression of respect toward the Eucharistic bread. he wrote in his encyclical on the Eucharist, though the idea of a banquet naturally suggests familiarity, the Church has never yielded to the temptation to trivialize this intimacy with her spouse by forgetting that he is also her Lord. The Eucharistic banquet is truly a sacred banquet in which the simplicity of the signs conceals the infallible holiness of God. The bread, which is broken on our altars, is the bread of angels, which cannot be approached except with the humility of the centurion in the gospel that we say at Mass. Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. This is in Pope John Paul II's encyclical Ecclesia Eucharistia, number 48. We will continue this in the next video clip. May God bless you and Mary guide you.